Black Lives Matter Minnesota, along with the Racial Justice Network, just stormed a church with their arbiter of all things good, true, and beautiful, Don Lemon, and the results are wild. Let's get into it.
So you can see the protesters here have gathered over here. They're in the middle of the church. So in the beginning of the church service, the pastor was speaking, and Nikema stood up and said her piece. And then the protesters surrounded her, but this is a clandestine mission. I think they found out according to them, this is according to Operation Pull-Up, that one of the pastors here is a member of ICE. And so, here we go.
You could talk to the lead pastor.
Yeah.
Let me show you.
Okay. So,
before we go too far, my name is Casey. I've been a husband, father, therapist, and conservative man for more than a decade, and I have seen the degradation of our society 1 hour, one client at a time. And if you would like to get behind a future of faith, fatherhood, and freedom in America, please like on the way in. Let's get into exactly what happened in Minnesota and why it is a violation of the civil rights of those who would worship. Let's go.
Yes, and I could also show you many opposing sides where we're also picking up the very criminals that have put Americans in danger. And I'm not saying it's pretty. I'm not saying it's not messy. I'm not saying it couldn't be better. I'm saying this is a part of a much larger dialogue in which one administration caused a great deal of chaos and havoc and danger for American citizens.
City's church in St. Paul, Minnesota was stormed by a couple different groups of protesters taking credit, but they're obviously in response to the ICE raids. And I have a point of contention for the derps that have done this, and that is people worshiping in a church have veritably nothing to do with policymakers. And supposedly there's a rumor that one of the pastors was involved with ICE somehow. Here's the thing, guys. Churches didn't ask for this. Matter of fact, people who are conservative that go to Christian churches are typically much more likely to give of their time, talent, and treasure to those who are immigrating to this country than even the leftists who proclaim that they're the ones who are self-righteous. But let's look at a little bit of what the protesters were doing as Don Lemon films, and how he ended up there is possibly the difference between whether he is complicit in this and able to be charged under the FACE Act, or whether he's just a willing idiot who's going along to get along. Watch this.
Whatever. So, I had no affiliation to that organization. I didn't even know they were going to this church until we followed them there. We were there chronicling protests. Once the protest started in the church, we did an act of journalism, which was report on it and talk to the people who were involved, which included the pastor, members of the church, and members of the organization. That's it. It's called journalism. First Amendment, all that stuff. For all of you people who believe in the First Amendment, absolutist, there you go.
Don Lemon claims in some of his reaction videos that he was just following around this group of protesters, and that he ended up in this church service, which is a violation of the FACE Act, which actually, in all things being equal, has been levied as a point of policy, which is quite often used to charge people who are praying outside of abortion clinics. And so in this case, it was, it should be applied equally. If you are going to raid a church, and by the way, very few people are ever walking through the doors of those kinds of clinics in order to pray, but if and when they did, that was possibly a violation of this FACE Act. But these protesters go in and they disrupt service. There was pictures of a young man, well, it was like a 4-year-old, crying his eyes out. And by the way, he was the son of a young woman who's obviously not an American, by heritage. And these are the kinds of results that happen when you burst into somewhere that is supposed to be sacred for the individuals that attend there. But let's look at Don Lemon defending himself as if he just, oops, there was a protest of 24 people and I just happened to be following them around, because those don't happen all day, every day, everywhere throughout the United States. And I just happened to find my way into this gonzo journalist situation in a church. Watch his weak and I find feckless defense. Don Lemon then tried to interview one of the church attendees outside, and the church attendee eventually loses his patience with Don and says, "You're not a real journalist," because Don begins asking questions of the individual, and then he tries to insert his own facts into the situation, and that's at the point where the guy just says, "You're not a real journalist because real journalists don't insert facts into their questioning." He said, "Why don't you do some real journalism? Let's watch this expert refutation from somebody who's clearly not trained but still owns a seasoned journalist like Don Lemon. Watch this."
No.
You won't, because
when you
because
pose
it's
as a journalist,
I am a
and you
journalist.
ask me
Journalists give
questions,
facts.
and then you start correcting me with facts, and don't have.
You shouldn't hear the facts.
Of course,
That
I should
most
hear
of the people
facts,
who are picked up
but
are
will you
not-
give me the
have
facts
no-
on both sides?
That is the facts.
Here's
on
the
both
thing
sides.
that the protesters don't realize. My background is in psychology, and one of the research points that's been most interesting to me recently is the ways that radicalism is galvanized. And part of what they don't realize is that quite often these protests and the ways that they go more extreme, like throwing pea soup at the Mona Lisa or whatever, actually serves in opposition to their point. So what will happen very often, they might count a couple of these church attendees as someone who would then second guess how much they might actually have to lose by going to church there, and that would further galvanize or solidify their position as being more robust in defense of the reasons why they would do something like go to church. And then for the ones who are more radical, that will push them even further and further into radicalism, because you've affirmed their presuppositions and their priors about who it is that they're fighting against. But luckily for these protesters, that we in the church do not fight with flesh and blood. We do not fight with traditional weapons. We fight with spirit, because we believe that this is a spiritual battle that we're engaged with. And so you can poke the bear, but you will further galvanize, solidify, and make people more instantiated in their position. And when that's a church, you're lucky, for one thing, because their position is generally nonviolent. But you're also extremely lucky in that their position has been basically what built the Western world, and the types of laws and policies that have been put forward that have allowed you free speech and the ability to protest. Those are the positions that the church held in antiquity that gave us the America that we have today. Whether you think that's appropriate or not, it is, as you begin to try to bleed the truth of the Gospels and the truth of the Bible out of the public sector, you are taking away some of the rights that were instantiated in the first place to give you the opportunity to protest. So luckily for you, if they do become more radical in their positions, that radicalism will actually serve to love and bless the people that are their enemies. Imagine this. So here's what the response has been from the administration, and gosh, for goodness sake, I wish that Trump were the man that his enemies thought he was, because these types of actions would be taken seriously and taken directly into the type of 24-hour courts that were happening in the UK, or directly into the type of J6 committee hearings where people would be frog marched and everything. You know, there would be exceeding punishment for this type of action if Trump were actually the man his enemies thinks he is. But he is not. He is not that radical. You know, he's a boomer trying to do boomer stuff in most cases. But the U.S. Department of Justice and Civil Rights Division says it is investigating the incident for potential violations of federal law, including whether protesters unlawfully interfered with worship. I don't think that there's any debate that they interfered with worship, and considering they broke in with that intention and purpose, I believe that that is unlawful, because you have the right to gather, you have the right of association, and many other rights that were probably violated on a civil rights suit. Supporters of Lemon say that he was just documenting things. We saw what he said about that. Many, including political commentators and religious leaders, argue that the action was inappropriate and unlawful, and that Lemon's presence and live streaming represent a dereliction of journalistic and civic norms. It's not just that. It would be blind luck if this incompetent, generally doofus journalist just lucked into the fact that they broke into this church. I refuse to believe that he's either that coincidentally lucky, or, you know, he could have been commensurate or a co-conspirator in this. And if that's true, I'd like to see him in prison. If he conspired for this to happen, in order to film it and live stream it and all that, he is out of his mind lucky. And if he conspired to do it, he should be in prison. Let's see a little bit of what the pastor says, how he says he's trying to care for his flock in this. And this is a good, gracious response, I think, along with showing the appropriate concern. I'm surprised he even spoke. I mean, if I were him, perhaps there would have been a little bit more spice in this, but good for him. Watch this.
What do you think of this?
I mean, this is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
But there were folks who will say,
I have to take care of my flock.
okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution in the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
We're here to worship. We're here to worship Jesus, because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world, is Jesus Christ.
I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me, though.
We're here to worship Jesus.
Yes.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we're here.
Okay.
That's what we're about.
Don't you think Jesus would be understanding
we're about
and love these folks?
We're about spreading the love of Jesus.
But did you try to talk to them as a Christian?
No one is willing to talk.
Okay.
I have to take care of my church and my family, so I asked that you actually would also leave this building.
You don't want us to chronicle what happened?
Unless you're here to worship.
I'm always worship. I'm a Christian.
We're here to worship.
Yeah.
We're here to worship. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Way past time for churches to have security teams and probably even locked doors. We've seen some of the things that occurred, like at the Catholic school in Minnesota, and other issues that have come about in the targeting of Christians. We as Christians know that we will have been on the margins, and if we sniffed anything like cultural hegemony, that probably was a misnomer. We probably never really had it to begin with, because I think authentic Christianity is more of a radical marginal movement than it is a center, because it does have dictates that are extreme, and some of those are the extremities with which we love our neighbor, and the extreme positions we take in like marriage and family. And there are a great many ways that Christianity won't meet what people think is middle of the road for a large majority of people, because it's a radical way of life. And so it's a religion. Obviously there's going to be radical tenets, radical followers, and that is just generally done better on the margins than it is in the center. And so if American life ever was a centered on Christianity movement, it would have been short-lived, because especially now in our post World War II order, there's not a whole lot that points to the strong gods, which is R.R. Reno's book, Return of the Strong Gods. Gods of faith, gods of patriotism, gods of nationalism. These things the general public does not have a flavor for, because it's been propagandized out of them, starting at age 8 in public schools and moving all the way through adulthood. As a millennial, an older millennial, I can attest. So this is where we're at. Churches, radically love your neighbors and radically secure your flock. And that is something that I'm proud to say my church does, both of those things. And it's time. Don't be unwitting about what time it is. If you're a pastor or a church leader, it is past time for us to take good care of the sheep that are in your stewardship. If you would like to take good care of the country so that we can have a future of faith, fatherhood, and freedom in America, please like, share, and subscribe. I would love your support.